My name's Liz, and I'd like to welcome you to the Children's Bookshow. We are a charity funded by Arts Council England, and every year we choose some of the best authors, illustrators, and poets from around the world to perform in theatres across the country, giving children the opportunity to see artists in real life talk about their work. We run in-school workshops where children get to work creatively with an author or illustrator in their own classroom, and we give away thousands of books to children each year. Today, we are extremely pleased to welcome onto our virtual stage the award-winning author and screenwriter, Frank Cottrell Boyce. Frank has always been a writer and has written scripts for TV shows like Coronation Street and Doctor Who, several films, and more recently, he co-wrote the sketch which so many people enjoyed, where Paddington Bear had tea with Queen Elizabeth to celebrate her jubilee. But today is all about books, and Frank is certainly a gifted author. He has written some fantastic stories, from his first book, the Carnegie Medal winner Millions, to Cosmic, Framed, and the astounding Broccoli Boy. The Sunday Telegraph hailed him as a writer of comic genius, and fellow author Hilary Mackay described his recent novel, Noah's Gold, as proper, sparkly, witty, enticing storytelling. So we are in truly excellent company. So please join me in giving an enormous welcome to Frank Cottrell Boyce.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hi, Liz. It's lovely to be here. Fantastic to be here. And I'm very excited to be talking to you. I thought today I would talk a little bit about this book, Noah's Gold, for a reason. And then we're going to stop and we're going to ask lots and lots of questions. Writing has taken me on many, many, many wonderful adventures, like Liz said. I've been, our old queen acted twice in her life, and bizarrely, I ended up writing both those things. So that's a very strange adventure. And Noah's Gold is about an adventure. I'm going to begin by reading you a little bit of it. It's the story of a school trip that goes hideously wrong when it's a school geography trip, and the geography teacher wants to take his class to see an Amazon warehouse. But instead of, it's actually called an Orinoco warehouse in the book, but instead of writing Amazon warehouse in the sat-nav, he just writes Amazon or Orinoco. So the minibus thinks it's going to cross the Atlantic Ocean and travel to South America, which is not really very feasible. So in the bit that I'm going to read you, they've just landed on a small island off the coast of Donegal. You need to know that Noah, who's the narrator of this book, is hidden away in the boot of the car. It's not really his geography it's not really his geography class field trip, but his big sister's, and his big sister has some enviable sandwiches that he's hoping to get hold of. So they've just landed. The road rose steeper and steeper, narrower and narrower, and higher and higher. With my face against the back window, I felt that if I opened the minibus door, I might fall straight into the sea, miles below. It was a bit like the feeling you get when you're on a roller coaster and it's chugging slowly, slowly up to the top. And there's a knot in your stomach because you know that any second now you're going to be plunging down the other side. The minibus stopped. It stopped so suddenly that everybody jerked forward, and I jerked forward so much I got my head stuck in the gap between the two back seats. "Something very confusing has happened," said Mr. Merriman. "Please wait here while I go and sort it out. There's nothing to worry about." I have never seen or heard anybody look so worried as Mr. Merriman looked when he said there was nothing to worry about. The minibus bounced a bit as he stepped down off it. The sound of seagulls breezed in through the open door. "Don't move," he said over his shoulder, and we didn't move. But the minibus did. Not much, but just enough for everyone to scream like they were on a roller coaster. And I thought this was probably the moment to emerge from my hiding place and let people know I was there. So I shouted, "Surprise!" But there was no one there. Everyone had gone. They'd all climbed off the front door of the minibus. I tried to get out the back door, but that was locked. I was trapped. No one even knew I was there. I tried to scramble over the back seat, but someone grabbed my foot and pulled me out. Eva, my big sister, had opened the back doors from the outside and was dragging me off the minibus. I tumbled out on top of her, and we both ended up on the grass. When I looked up, the minibus was rolling away. I didn't understand exactly what was happening, but I did manage to snatch Eva's backpack out of the boot and hold it over my head, shouting, "It's all right, everyone, I've got the sandwiches." Everyone just looked straight through me, and I thought, I wonder who's stolen the jam from their donuts. But then I followed their gaze. They were looking out to sea, hundreds of feet below us, because we had stopped on the edge of a cliff. It's a funny thing, but the first thing I noticed was the grey backs of the seagulls as they cruised across the calm blue, endless waters below. I say it's a funny thing because when you think about it, the seagulls and the sea were not the most interesting things to look at just then. The really interesting thing to look at just then was the minibus, because it was falling off a cliff. It suddenly vanished. I'm saying suddenly because I can't think of another word to describe how quickly this happened. You might think you know what suddenly means, but you have not seen suddenly until you suddenly see your school minibus suddenly tip back and suddenly cartwheel off the edge of a cliff, which is the kind of suddenly that happens so suddenly you don't have time to believe what you're suddenly seeing. There was a minibus, and then there was no minibus, and then there was a sound like half a ton of pots and pans falling off a shelf, and then there was the sound of my brain saying, "Well, the minibus has fallen off a cliff then, and you got off it just in time." And the reason I wanted to talk about this story today is that it's a story of a group of children who are stuck on an island. And there are lots of stories about people stuck on islands, and they nearly all end badly. In Treasure Island, they end up shooting at each other. On Fortnite, you fight for scarce resources. In Lord of the Flies, it's really horrible. They hunt each other down. Nearly all island stories end with things going badly. And that's because people often think that when times are bad, people behave badly. And I think that we are the stories that we tell. And at the beginning of the pandemic, this huge experience that you've all had, this extraordinary experience that hasn't happened for hundreds of years, at the beginning, there was a story that because times were bad, people would behave badly and everyone would burst into Tesco's and club each other to death with toilet rolls. But that didn't happen. You all behaved amazingly. You did great work. You came to school online. You put up with things. You looked after your neighbours. You went to see your grannies through windows. You were heroic. You were a heroic generation. And because we are the stories that we tell, I think it's very important that when you grow up and have children and grandchildren, because they will all be asking you about this, because it's such a wild and weird thing that's happened to you, I think it's very important that you tell them how amazing they are, how amazing you were, and how heroic you were. You were a great generation. Don't forget that. And so I wanted to write a story about how brilliantly you people behave. And I looked around for other island stories. So I'm going to show you I'm going to tell you a story now that is a true story, but I think it's a story that you won't believe because it's very hard to believe. It's the story of some people in 1969 who didn't like their school dinners. And maybe you don't like your school dinners. And if you don't like your school dinners, maybe you do things like bring sandwiches or sneak out to Greg's. But these boys had a different idea. So can we have a look at some slides? Which whiz through some slides. Should we go through? We're going to get the pictures up. Here we are. Here are our pictures. That's my name. And that's the thing I wrote for Paddington and the Queen. We can go past that. And then there's one of, this is a robot called Eric that we might talk about later. Next one, and that's the Queen and James Bond, which I also wrote. How strange is this? This, by the way, is the internet cable that brings the internet from America to Europe. It lands in the Hebrides on a beach. Look how fragile it is. I think people think the internet is up in the air in a cloud or something, but it's just a wire like any other wire. And part of this story is that the internet gets cut off as well. So can we have the next slide, please? I sound like the scientists in the pandemic now. Okay, so this is a slide. And this story is about some little boys who lived on, will you be able to see my cursor? This little group of islands here called Tonga. And they didn't like their school dinners. And they didn't think to themselves, let's bring some sandwiches. And there was no branch of Greg's because it was 1969. So one of them had this idea. And I'm going to give you a second to think about whether you think this is a good idea. They thought to them, one of them said, my cousin lives in the islands of Fiji, up here on the top left corner of the map, about 900 miles away. And he says their school dinners are great. So why don't we go to their school? We could go in a boat. And this would be a terrible idea in any circumstances. But also, they didn't have a boat, so they had to steal one. And also, they were not good at sailing. So instead of ending up on Fiji, on the top left-hand corner of the map, they ended up down here on a tiny, tiny, tiny island called Atta. I've got a picture of Atta. Can we see the picture of Atta? Tiny island called Atta. It's a very, very pointy island. As you can see, it's a pointy, pointy island, which means that anywhere you sit on that island, you are going to get a sore bum. It has no beaches. It's got no trees. It's not a good place to live. In the millions of years that it's been sticking out of the sea, nobody has ever wanted to live there. But these 6 boys crashed their boat there. And if the stories were right, they should have ended up falling out and fighting each other and beating each other up and splitting into different groups and hunting each other down and eating each other or something. But that's not what happened. They climbed to the top of the island and they found that it had been a volcano. So the soil there was very, very fertile. There was lots of fruit. The birds on the island were not used to human beings, so they weren't scared of these boys at all. So these boys could easily take away the birds' eggs. And they found some bamboo. They made some fishing rods. So they had fish, they had eggs, they had fruit, they had veg. They learned to grow corn there. They were there for 18 months. 18 months. They went fishing. And they had time on their hands. So with the bamboo, they made musical instruments. What? And they made a gym. They made a gym. And they really, really looked after each other. One of them broke his leg. And the others made a big chair and just carried him around the island for the whole time. And after 18 months, a little fishing boat went past and saw some smoke and thought, that's not right. Rescued the boys, took them off the island, and then they were arrested for stealing a boat. And a few years later, they went back to visit the island, and I've got a picture of just how well they looked. So you can tell how well they looked after each other. Look at this. That's them in their gym. That's the gym that they made. So sometimes when times are bad, oh, not that one. That's a surprise. Okay. Sometimes when times are bad, people don't behave badly. People behave better than ever, which is what you all did during the pandemic. So this book is really my congratulations card to you all for behaving so amazingly during the pandemic, and hoping that you never forget it and you never forget to tell people about it. I'm going to read you a little bit more, and then we're going to answer questions. I'm going to read you the bit where the hero, Noah, goes fishing. He's never been fishing before. I don't know if you've been fishing. Noah thinks it might be easy to catch a fish. This is what I know about fishing. You put a bait on a hook. You put the hook in the water. The fish eats the bait. The hook catches the fish. You eat the fish. But it turns out that this is just a theory. When the first touch of daylight slipped in through the hole in the roof, I took the big fishing rod and set out to catch a fish. I thought, how hard can it be to catch a fish? Well, I'll tell you how hard. It's very hard. It's very, 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 really, 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 really hard. The only bait I had was one leftover potato, which was in the bottom of the pan. I thought about eating that potato, and that might have been a better idea. I looked into the water from the end of the jetty. There were streaks of sunlight under the surface, like the shreds of orange peel in marmalade. Tasty-looking little brown fish nosed right up to the potato, and then they turned around and swam away again. I don't know what the zoological name for these fish is, but I've been calling them ungrateful fish. And I wondered if the fish further out would be less ungrateful. I stepped off the jetty onto the first rock and hopped from there onto another rock and another rock and another rock, and got quite a long way out to sea just by hopping on and off rocks. The water out there looked colder and darker and deeper, but there was something in it. A huge white wobbly square, like a floating tablecloth or a submarine ghost. It got smaller, then it got bigger, then it got smaller, then it got bigger. And I realized that meant it was diving into the depths and then rising up again. It was a big fish, or as I like to think of it, a big breakfast, which would be a good swap for one potato. I dropped my fishing line into the water just above where I thought its head was, and I tried to dangle the potato into the fish's mouth. But then the whole big white shape disappeared. Everything went black. 1 minute, I was standing on a rock. The next, I was being dragged through the waves and out to sea. Because the big white tablecloth was not a big white fish. The big white tablecloth was just one small part of an absolutely colossal fish. And the absolutely colossal fish had closed its absolutely colossal white mouth around my potato and the fishing line, and it had decided on a potato starter with a main course of me. I was now the big breakfast. The shock of the cold seawater froze my brain, so my hands didn't think about letting go of the fishing rod until we were way out to sea, and when I did let go, I had one happy little moment where I thought I might bubble back to the surface and swim back to the jetty. I was wrong. I surfaced, but the salty water went up my nose, and I couldn't breathe. The spray was blinding my eyes. My hand reached out and grabbed something slippy and surprisingly cold, and that thing was the side of the giant fish. At least I thought, if I'm holding onto her, she can't eat me. She wasn't moving fast. She was just kind of lolling along on the surface, but then she veered around and turned back towards the shore. Carving a slow circle in the water until we were facing the island again. Now, I had an excellent view of the island, but I couldn't really appreciate that because I had noticed something over to my left and something over to my right. Triangular fins. Mine was not the only giant shark in the sea. There were sharks on either side of me, all heading back towards the bay in perfect unison, like something from Strictly Sharks Come Dancing. One of them flipped its tail out of the water and smashed it down again, as if to say, I've got a tail the size of a truck, and I'm going to eat this kid. There was the island in front of me, like Google Earth 3D. There was the jetty, there were the rocks, there was the green hill rising behind, and a thin grey scribble of smoke from our fire. And as we got nearer, I could even hear Lola trying to get the others to tidy up. The sea was very still. Suddenly, what looked like tiny silver slivers shot clear of the water and splashed back down again just ahead of us. And it sounded like applause, as though the sea was really into Strictly Sharks Come Dancing. I wanted to let go, but I couldn't let go. I don't know if it was my brain that was frozen or my fingers. I shouted for help. I shouted a lot. The others must have heard me, but it was Eve who came running. The shark and I sailed along the line of the beach past the big black rocks, and even though I was about to be eaten alive, it was still quite interesting to see that there was another beach just around the corner from ours. Dario was climbing over the rocks, trying to keep pace with me. He was shouting something. He shouted, "Basking shark!" Really? He thought I might be interested in what kind of shark was going to eat me, what species of shark was going to eat me. "It's a vegetarian," he shouted. Well, that's great. So the shark's a vegetarian. But how does it know I'm not a vegetable? I'm going to stop there. I'm going to show you a picture of the shark. This is a real shark. Can we see the shark? That's not a shark. The shark's coming up. Here comes the shark. This is a real shark, and you see them a lot around the coast of Northern Ireland and sometimes off the coast of the Isle of Man. So can you see what I mean about its big white mouth? This is a basking shark, and it's the second biggest fish in the world. The only bigger one is the whale shark, and you can see them a lot around our coasts if you know where to look. They're amazing things. They're amazing things. And it's really true that they kind of loll around on the surface, and they're actually quite gentle. So if you know where there is one, you can get a little boat out and row over to it and pat it on the back. And I've even thought about trying to ride one. But you must promise me that if you do that, you will ask your parents' permission first. I'm not encouraging you to go around riding on sharks in the North Sea. Okay, I'm going to stop there. and let you ask questions. What's the best way to do the questions?
Right, I will. I've got
Tons
lots of questions here. There are so many questions already, but feel free to add more, and we'll do what we can to answer them. So I am going to start with one that lots of schools have asked already. So Globe, Western Primary, St Matthew's, Ipswich have asked, what is your favourite book, Frank, and why?
My favourite book ever?
Yeah.
Okay, I would think it's hard to pick a favourite. There's a couple of picture books that I would really hate to be without. I love The Tiger Who Came to Tea, because I love the page where they go out to tea. I love that page. And I also love that John Klassen book, I Want My Hat Back. It's a brilliant, brilliant piece of storytelling. And I absolutely idolise a woman called Edith Nesbit, who wrote The Five Children and It, and The Phoenix and the Carpet, and The Railway Children, which I think are the best children's books that I know. I love those books.
Oh, brilliant.
Thank you for asking.
No, it's a great, good to know. Now, loads and loads of schools have asked about Cosmic, which is another of your books. So Gilbert Colvin Primary ask, what inspired you to write Cosmic? Okay. Will there be part 2? Why did you base part of Cosmic in China?
Oh, yeah, that's a good thought.
Yeah.
Okay, so the inspiration, I like it when little things happen in life. For me, the best place to start a story is thinking, wouldn't it be great if? And a thing happened. My son had a very good friend who called every day and asked him to play out after school. He would knock on the door and go, hey, is Benedict playing out? And the two little boys would go off together and play football, and it was all really lovely. And we went away. We went to live somewhere else for a year. And while we were away, this boy had a growing spurt. So my son was listening for the knock on the door. And it came, but it was not. It was like, and the door opened like, and here was this giant mutant version of his friend standing in the doorway saying, hello, is Benedict playing out? And there was my little boy like, looking up at his friend who'd grown huge. And I thought then, wouldn't it be great if you were 11 years old, but you looked like a grown-up? What would you do? So that was what got me started on Cosmic. The other question was, why is it set in China?
Yeah, why is part of it set in China?
Because when I was writing that book, China just sent up its first manned spaceship, its first manned rocket. And we were not sending up a lot of rockets with people on board at the time. Since then, there's been SpaceX and people do go to space now, but there hadn't been, when I wrote that book, there hadn't been people going to space for a long time. We sent probes and satellites up, but not really people except in the space shuttle. So it was kind of exciting. And I also loved the idea of a boy from this part of Liverpool where I live, just an ordinary part of the world, ending up, crossing the desert in China and seeing all kinds of exciting things. And I wanted the story to be, the story's about a boy who wants to see the whole world. So I wanted him to see the whole world. And he ends up he literally sees the whole world, but through one window. He goes up into space and he can see the entire planet. But I wanted him to travel a bit.
Brilliant. I'm reading it at the moment, everyone, and I'm really enjoying it. Now, Ludlow Primary would like to ask, have you always loved reading?
Oh, goodness, that's such an interesting question. Have I? I don't know. I think it depends what you mean by always. But I think I came to reading quite late. I think I was in about year 6 when I started to kind of get interested in books and reading. I think I had that thing, where I was going to big school and thought, I don't really want to grow up yet. So I started reading lots of books that would have been quite young for me, but I really loved them. So I think what I would like to say about that is that was a time when I was getting a bit worried and anxious, and books really helped me through, escaping into a book and the magic of that book. And the books that I read then to give me somewhere to kind of escape to in my mind from all my worries, they still do that for me. And that's a really good reason for reading. If you read a lot when you're 10, 11, 12, 13, it builds a kind of happiness machine inside you. And we've all been through some very difficult times recently, and we're still going through difficult times with cost of living crisis and pandemics and all kinds of crazy stuff going on. And even now, sometimes I can just pick up one of my favorite books, and even just holding it makes me happy again. And it reminds me of those times and how happy I was in a book. So that's a really good reason to read. I know there are lots of good reasons to read. It's always great to hear other people's stories, and reading builds your vocabulary and makes you clever and all those things. But the most important thing is that it helps you to be happy. Because as you get older, you find that knowing how to be happy is a very important skill.
Yeah, interesting. Another good question, which I like here, is what was the first library you ever visited?
Oh, I walked past it yesterday, and it's a carpet warehouse now.
Oh,
I lived in it.
sad.
No, it's horrible. And it was the school that I went to is quite near that library, and my brother and I are building a library for that school. I can remember it really exactly. We lived in a very, very overcrowded flat when I was little. It was a 2-bedroom flat, but my grandma lived in one room, and me, my mum, my brother and I, and my dad all lived in the other. It must have been terrible for my mum. It was only when I was very little. But so we spent a lot of time in the library, and I think she was just trying to get away. And it was lovely because it was beautiful inside and all lovely colours and nice and quiet and safe. And there was a book there called Where the Wild Things Are. And I remember getting that book out and thinking, oh, what is this? This is wild. I love this book so much. And then I took it back to the library, and someone else must have got it out because I never saw it again. I wanted to see it again. And over the years, I came to believe that I had written that book or dreamed it. Not written it, dreamed it. And I used to think to myself, when I'm big, I'm going to write that book. People are going to love it, and I'm going to be so rich. And then we moved house. And the school that I went to had multiple copies of Where the Wild Things Are. And I was like, no, I'm ruined. This is the end of my dream. Somebody's already done this book. But I thought it was my book. I thought I dreamed it. Where the Wild Things Are.
That's brilliant.
And it's a brilliant. If you haven't read it, it's an amazing book. The best fan letter ever any writer ever got. The man who wrote that book was called Maurice Sendak. And one little boy's mother wrote to him and said, my son loves that book so much. And when we were going out, he wouldn't leave it behind. So he ate it. He ate the book. I'm not leaving it behind. He bit the book.
Yeah. I wouldn't recommend that, children.
Well, I would recommend Where the Wild Things Are. It's a great book.
I mean, loving it that much is great. So somebody else had asked, actually, so when you were little, did you want to be an author? So that, you know.
Can I tell you a story about that? Shall I tell you a story about that? When I was in school, all the way through school, I had a really, really good friend called Graham. And we used to just sit at the back and chat to each other. We weren't bad, but we weren't doing anything. Then we got to year 6, and in year 6, people started to be good at things. So there are people who are good at football, people who are good at drawing, people who are good at maths, people who had tidy handwriting, hated them. People who were good at telling jokes, people who were good at netball. And there was a boy in my class who was very, very, very good at beating up other children. He really was really marvellous at it. And we weren't good at anything. And then my friend was off sick for a very long time. And I don't know why, but one day I just put all the effort I used to put into chatting to him into a piece of work, and I was writing away. And at the end of the lesson, teacher collected my work, and she looked at it, and she looked at me, and she looked at it, and she looked at me. She was like, how did this come out of Frank? And she could see it was a good piece of work. So she went to the front of the class, and she did this magical thing. And for any teacher who was listening, I want you to know how magical this was. She read out my story. She read it out in her voice. And to me, hearing a grown-up read my words was an absolutely magical, magical thing. And I've never, ever forgotten that day. And that's the day I started to think, well, words are something you can be good at. The way some people are good at football, Some people are good at drawing. Some people are good at playing the piano. And Jamie is very, very good at beating people up. And all you have to do is practice. But it made me think some words are funnier than others. Some words are sadder than others. Some words are more beautiful than others. And if you choose the right words, you can make people think, you can make people cry, you can make people laugh, you can start a fight, you can end a fight if you choose the right words. So that's when I started to think about words. And I want any teachers listening to hear that, because obviously I've been around a very long time. I've made lots of films. I've had amazing actors reading my words. Amazing actors. I mean, all the famous actors that you want to think of reading my words. And well, the Queen read my words, but nothing has ever come close to hearing my Year 6 teacher read it. And I never go and see a film that I've made or a play that I've made or anything like that without remembering sitting at the back and hearing her read them out. So big thank you to all teachers who have that power.
What was your teacher called who wrote it out?
She was called Sister Paul. She was very good. Yeah, I went to see her years later.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, that's really a really amazing story. Thanks for sharing that, Frank. So moving on from that, well, and it's kind of similar actually, but lots of people have asked, how do you start to write a story? So when you're about to write a book, how do you start?
That's wonderful that someone's asked that. That's a really great question, because I really feel strongly that there's magic in starting. So I think a lot of people, I mean, everyone's different. I know lots of people who very carefully plan everything out so they know it's there. But I think there's something magic about just jumping into a story and just starting. So one really important thing that I think people don't know and they should know is this, that people always ask you where ideas come from, and it kind of doesn't matter, because the truth is that your best ideas come from other ideas. So if you've got just enough of an idea to start writing, if you start, other ideas will come, because ideas are like starlings, or they're like little fish. They're like the little fish in the story. They love to be in a shoal. They love to dance, and maybe they're magnetic or something. If you start to write anything at all, I promise you, other ideas will come. Other ideas will come. So I finished my book a few weeks ago, and normally I've started my next one by the time I finished the first one. And this time I haven't. And I've had a few weeks of not writing a book for the first time ever, really, since Year 6, of not writing something. And at first it was kind of like, this is quite nice. I'm kind of enjoying this. And then I started to get a bit nervous. And then yesterday, on the train on the way back from my World Book Day event, I just had a little thought and I started to write, and loads of ideas came. And now I can't even remember what the little thought that started off was, but now I kind of know what the book is going to be. So it's like fishing. You just have a little bit of bait, you drop the worm in, and a big fish comes and swallows the worm, and you don't even need the worm anymore.
And in that case, Frank, what do you do when you start to write things down? Do you write on your phone, or do you write on a little notebook?
I brought this with me. It's very important that writing is fun and pleasurable. So I try to leave working on the computer till the very last, to as late as I can. So I buy myself a very nice notebook. Actually, I wouldn't have bought one as nice as this. My daughter bought me this. And I write the first draft really quickly. And it's very, very messy. And I don't worry about neatness or spelling. I just cross things out. I leave a page blank in case I have a better idea. And I just crack on through it, get it done as quickly as possible. And I don't care how messy it is. I do get worried about losing the book. Sorry, there's horrible drawings in there. So that's what I do. And then, do you know what I do after that? There's an app called Dictate that cost me 59 pence. And I read this out to the app and it turns it into text. But what's good is it's not very good. So the text is full of things like, can someone answer that phone? Or is anyone going to answer the door? Or yes, I know it's dinner time, I'm coming in a minute. And all the kind of mistakes that you've made where you've said one word and it's spelt it a different way. So you've tried to say migraine and it's come out as me too, or I don't know, whatever. So you make all these corrections. When you're reading the book out, you find that your mind is already changing it. When you make the corrections, you find that your mind is already changing it. So it doesn't feel like hard work till I'm on my third draft or something. So write it down quickly and just get it done. Get it done.
That's brilliant. Great tips, guys. Take note. Right, next question. So we've got time for a few more. Okay, just because it's World Book Day, well, it was yesterday, but half the country was not at school. So anyway, if you could dress up as someone on World Book Day, who would it be?
Oh,
I love this question. Sorry, I haven't written down who that was. It didn't say the school,
okay.
so
So
sorry.
I've answered hundreds and hundreds of questions this week, and no one's asked me that. And that is it.
Yes.
So whoever asked that question, that is excellent question. Goodness me, what's the answer?
Well,
Do you know what? Oh no, God, I don't know. What's the answer to that? I'm not going to dress up as Paddington. I'm not walking around in a big bearskin. Who's got the most? Who's got the most cozy? I think I'd go as Gandalf. That nice big floaty thing with a big hat. That'd be good, wouldn't it?
Yeah. That would be great, actually.
Yeah,
good idea. Okay, so someone at Swallowdale Primary asked, how long does it take for you to write a book?
Well, it usually takes. The honest answer is it usually takes about a year, but a book sometimes kind of decides on itself. So I wrote a book called The Unforgotten Coat that did really well, and I wrote that in 3 weeks. I mean, it's quite a short book, but sometimes when you work fast, you're giving it your best shot, aren't you? So that would be good. I'm always hoping to do that again.
Yeah. Oh, and Mrs. McGuinness, I like this one. Hello, Mrs. McGuinness.
Hello, Mrs. McGuinness.
She asks, what's your favourite genre of book?
To read?
Well, I guess so. She doesn't specify, so.
Well, I still love reading children's books because I find that children's books often have great big ideas in them. Yeah, children's books, I think. But I mean, I love something funny because I know that it's very, very hard to write funny. It's really hard to write funny. If you don't get the right word, it's just not funny. So it's like doing a magic trick. You either get it right or you get it wrong. There's nothing in between. So I like to read someone who's very funny. That would be what I really like.
And Miss Maidens asks, what was the most fun book of yours to write? Yeah, that's quite a good question as well.
I don't know if fun is the right word, but I had a wonderful time writing Cosmic because one of the lovely things about being a writer is that you can write to anybody in the world and say, I'm writing a book about this thing that you're the cleverest person in the world about this. Would you mind having a conversation with me? And people will always say yes, nearly. And so when I was writing Cosmic, I wrote to lots of astronauts and I got to speak to a man called Alan Bean, who was the 4th man to walk on the moon. And so I've sat down and had a conversation with someone who walked on the moon. I mean, that's pretty memorable, isn't it? Like, there aren't many.
Wow.
Yeah. And he chatted to me about what it's like on the moon. We talked for ages about what color it was. He's always trying to figure out what color the moon was because it's grey, but it's also incredibly beautiful. So that was amazing. And I loved writing Noah's Gold because I wrote it during the lockdown and when I was doing lots of online creative writing classes for children. And so any children who turned up to that, you were part of my inspiration for this story. So I felt as though I was writing it in the middle of a crowd of really great people. So I've got very happy memories of writing that book.
I'm just looking at the time, Frank. Are you going to finish on another reading?
Yeah, because people wanted to talk about Cosmic, so I thought I'd read a little bit, just a tiny bit from Cosmic. And I like reading this bit because one of my happiest experiences reading to anybody was I was in a school in Scotland, in Glasgow, and it was a school full of very, very big boys. You know, some schools are good at sports or good at maths or good at languages. This just seemed to be a school that was good at making boys big, and they were all huge, and I was a bit scared of them. So I read this bit and I left it on a cliffhanger. And at the end I said, does anyone have any questions? And the first boy put his hand up and went, could you read a bit more? Sorry, I'm doing the accent. I shouldn't really do that for any reason. Could you read a bit more? And I said, well, that's great, but we're running out of time. So get it out of the library or ask your teacher to make it the class read. I'm so happy that you want to read a bit more. And then the next boy put his hand up and went, So what happens next? And I said, well, it's great that you want to know what happens next. And we're running out of time, but get the book out of the library and get your teacher students to class. It'll be so nice. And then a boy at the back put his hand up. And honestly, this boy was the biggest mammal I've ever seen in my life. I mean, he was like a small town with arms. And he put his hand up, and literally, and honestly, the weather changed when he put his hand up. And I said, and what's your question? And he went, would you just read me, man? So that's the best review I've ever had. So I just carried on reading. So this is a bit where Liam, who has discovered that if he has Florida with him, they look like a dad and a little girl. It's from Cosmic. Liam's had a huge growing spurt. He looks like a grown-up. Florida is very young for her age. So they've figured out that if they go around together, they don't just look, they look like a father and daughter. And they've decided, they've gone to the city centre to have a little shopping trip. And they've just discovered the showroom, a car showroom. Florida said that would be going too far, wouldn't it? I said, I don't know, let's find out. This was the very first time I'd ever been in a car showroom. I had never seen a car on a carpet before. It was like being in the living room of the posh car family. The cars looked smaller and glossier than they usually do. And a man in a suit saw us come in and said, with you in a minute, help yourself to tea and coffee. There was a coffee machine and a plate of biscuits. Disappointingly, they were mostly plain digestive. There was just one chocolate bourbon, and Florida got that. She walked around dropping crumbs on the carpet. There was one really sleek-looking car. Florida said, take a picture of me with this. Why? Because that's what dads do. You're supposed to be my dad. So she leaned on the bonnet of the car and smiled while I took her picture. Straight away, the man in the suit was standing next to us. I admire your taste, he said. Florida said, this is a Porsche Boxster. Wayne Rooney's got two like this. He has indeed, said the man in the suit, and he bought them both from me. You're a very well-informed little girl. Then he asked me how old she was. I said, she's 11. Then I thought I should say something a bit grown up, so I said, I'm not convinced by this colour. Well, there's a red one like Wayne's over there. Come and take a look. So I did. I've got to agree with you, sir. A car like this was born to be red. It was nice of him to agree with me, because I hadn't said anything at all. She costs a bit, though, sir. Oh, I know. The price of the car was written on the windscreen. It took up most of the windscreen. But she is worth it, sir. Oh, yeah. Are you looking to buy, sir, or are you just looking? Yes, I know what I should have said, but to buy sounded a bit more grown up. Would you be bringing your old car in part exchange? No, I like my old car. I'll probably keep my old car. It's a good car, my old car. I know the score, sir. The other one is your family car. And that's for when you're being a proper grown-up dad. This one is for when you're playing boy races. Isn't that right? Men, we never grow up, do we? He said to Florida. And Florida said, well, this one definitely hasn't. Right, said the man. Let's pretend we have grown up. What's your income? Well, I'm not sure. I said, it varies, really. You're right. You're so right. I'm too nosy. I mean, you haven't even said you want to buy this car yet, have you? No, I haven't said I want to buy this car. And that's when Florida said, can we sit in it? He looked at her for a second and she said, please. Go on then. We climbed into the Porsche. She whispered, you should have told me to say please. But you did say please. Yeah, but you should tell me before I get the chance. That's what dads do. Okay. The man in the suit looked in and winked at Florida and said, comfy? Yeah, said Florida. I said, yeah, what, Florida? And she said, yeah, thanks. And then the man handed me the keys. Go on, he said, you know you're dying to. Just drive her out onto the forecourt and see how she handles. And before I could say another thing, he was asking the other salesman to move the other cars out of the way and open the big doors of the showroom so that I could drive the Porsche outside. I could have said, yes, he said, I'll push the seat back for you. You're a big lad, aren't you? I could have said, yes, I'm a big lad, but that does not mean I'm a grown-up. I didn't say that, though. I said, thanks, mate. Have you got your driving license on you? No, I haven't. I tried not to sound too happy about that. That's all right. I trust you. Thousands wouldn't. And he waved me into the seat and he crouched down next to me and he gave me a guided tour of the dashboard. That's your CD player. That's your ergonomic seat thing. That's your sat nav in case you want to go somewhere. And these are the keys. And he handed me the keys. And I turned the key in the ignition. and the Porsche made a sound like a cat purring, and the man stepped aside and he pointed to the bonnet. "Engine nearing perfection," he said. "It is at the moment," I thought, "but in 2 minutes' time it might well be 1/2 ton of twisted scrap metal." I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much, Frank.
Thank you.
Well, that was such a lovely event, and thanks to everybody for coming. I'm sorry we don't have more time. I could have sat here all day listening to the answers to your questions. And I hope all you children out there are inspired to write like Frank.
Yes, just begin.
Yeah, just start. Just make some stories. And if you've got any examples of your work that are really good, send them in to us. We'd love to see them, and we might even be able to put some on our website. Right, that's all we have time for, I'm afraid. But please, before we go, join me in saying a last, final, massive thank you to Frank Cottrell Boyce. You have been amazing. Thank you, Frank, and thank you to everyone for joining us today.